the Department of Defense actually paid Bob Monroe, to train me in how to control out of bodies, because I was having spontaneous ones after my near-death experience in 1970. They knew that. I wasn't able to control them or anything. They would just happen. And so they actually hired him to teach me how to control those events and make them happen. They wanted to test what the differences were in collecting information in the out-of-body way or in the remote viewing way, psychic way.
Welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness. It is Behind Greatness by Inspire. Before we get into this next conversation we have with Joe, I want to, as always, as customary, because we really are thankful, I want to thank our listeners for coming on board for the last 4 years, and our viewers now, as now we've revamped our YouTube channel, and we're reposting, refurbishing, thanks to great work of our producer, Chris, who Joe just met a few minutes ago. I want to also direct the listener, the viewer, by all means, please visit our website. You'll see all our cache of conversations for the last 4 years, since May 2020. Our non-for-profit's been around since 2011. So we've been at this for quite a while. We're all a team of volunteers. We're all entrepreneurs in our regular lives, and we come together because we want to have these kinds of conversations with people all over the world. And we're having lots of fun. So we're on every podcast platform. If you go to our website, you'll see also other information. We're a not-for-profit and charity, as most of our listeners know. If you're so inclined to donate, you can do it there, right there on the site, and all the other good stuff. And that is all, other than wanting to ask you to rate, subscribe, share, give us a listen, man. Thanks for your support. So we're rejoined again by one of our favorite guests, Joe McMoneagle. Joe, thanks for coming back.
Oh, yeah. Wouldn't miss it.
Yeah. And that's the truth, because we're recording that proof. Sorry, I interrupted you, Joe. You were going to say something else kind to me.
I'm just going to say I'm having fun. When I have fun, I stick around.
Thanks, man.
I don't have fun, I leave.
So if you leave here, the listener will never know, because we'll just cut it off and pretend that you had fun.
There. Fade out.
You know it. Okay, Joe. So for the listener who's new to you and your story, I implore that person, please go to our part 1, and you'll understand exactly what this is all about. I'm not going to reintroduce you because, frankly, you don't need to be reintroduced. So we'll go right into it. In the last few minutes of our last conversation, if I remember correctly, you started to mention the Monroe Institute. So today you are, or you have been closely affiliated to the Monroe Institute. You want to give us a quick background on what they're about? Sure. And what you're doing there?
When I was in the special project doing the remote viewing for the Army, I started having some difficulty with my cool down. I call it my cool down. That's where I prep my mind for work. You gotta kind of empty your mind and try not to think about other things. It takes a lot of focus. And I was having trouble with that. And my cool down had gone from, a half hour of preparation. It was exceeding an hour. And my boss, the major, was upset with that. He wanted more response, I think. In the Army, it's like, hurry up and do it, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So the longer I delayed, the worse it got. So he asked me if I had any ideas, and I said, I heard there's this place called the Monroe Institute. It was started and established by a guy named Robert Monroe, who wrote the first book ever on separating from your body, being out of body, if you understand.
Yep.
Leaving his body. And he thought at the time, he was going crazy, or something was wrong with him neurologically. So, but he kept a lot of notes because he had sort of a quasi-science background. He was a writer and producer and whatnot for RKO Studios in New York for many, many years. So he was an executive there. And I don't know if you remember shows like with Phantom Nose and The Invisible Man, that sort of stuff.
Invisible Man, I know.
Well, he had a lot to do with inventing those actual shows and they were serialized at the time for the radio. Well, he wrote the first book on Journeys Out of the Body, he called it. It was about his experiences in this. And he didn't intend to publish it because back then in the late 50s, early 60s, it was like a little bit crazy.
Sure.
If you brought it up in the public. So, and being an executive at RKO, he didn't want to have that happen. But a guy named Charlie Tart, a Dr. Charles Tart, who wrote probably the seminal book on consciousness. He's a professor at UC Davis. He's a professor emeritus now. He wrote this great book. Well, he happened to see the journal that he had kept. So he turned it over to somebody, and it wound up at Doubleday, and it got printed. So it came out as Journeys Out of the Body. That was the first book ever written or published on out of the body events. Well, I had heard about this, and I knew that they had relaxation tapes and things like that, things that would help you focus, because they used different sound backgrounds to do that. Change the way the synchronization of the brain waves and things work.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, maybe if I go down there, it'll help. So they have these week courses. They're called Gateways. So I went down and took a Gateway. And that was many moons ago. That was in the late 70s, early 80s. As a result, I would come back from there the first time I went down, very mellow. It took away a lot of my stress. My cool down was better. And so I actually got sent down 2 more times. So I met him, and of course I couldn't tell him what I was doing, but I had a sincere interest in what he was doing. And so we shared a lot. Well, it turns out that it had such an impact on my work that the military started thinking about, well, maybe we ought to go down there and check this out and whatnot, which they did. And eventually the Department of Defense actually paid Bob Monroe, to train me in how to control out of bodies, because I was having spontaneous ones after my near-death experience in 1970. They knew that I wasn't able to control them or anything. They would just happen. And so they actually hired him to teach me how to control those events and make them happen. They wanted to test what the differences were in collecting information in the out-of-body way or in the remote viewing way, psychic way. So I spent long weekends for about 12 to 14 months. I'd leave on a Thursday night after I finished my remote viewing at Fort Meade. I'd drive there. It took about 2 hours, almost 3 hours to get there. And I'd go and I'd work with him on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday all day in his lab together. And he was teaching me how to do those things. And I did that for I think it was about 14 months. So,
and he was paid by the DOD to do these things with you for those 12 to 14 months every weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And I was able to actually learn to control it. And I did 2 or 3 problems for them using just out of body, not the psychic or remote viewing stuff, and was able to draw and replicate some things that were across the world. It was able to draw them in to scale, pretty much tell you what they did and how they operated by actually
Wow.
finding the building they were in, passing through the wall, going to the lab, that sort of thing.
Let's take a pause.
No, it sounds crazy, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's, you know, I heard one of your stories from you on the previous podcast that I mentioned. I mean, it didn't surprise me, but now that you're telling me face to face, there's still a shock value. It's amazing, right? Because I already kind of knew this, and it's still shocking. So for the listener, you were being trained by Bob Monroe, who was being paid by the Department of Defense to help hone what they thought was a skill of yours to leave your body, so to have an out-of-body experience, and then use that skill. So it's not a question of whether they had to figure out whether this was a skill or something. They knew that this was something.
They knew it was a skill.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they wanted you to operationalize that.
Right. And I was able to do that. It took 14 months because it's different. It's like when you're psychically functioning or you're using remote viewing to produce information, it's instantaneous. You have automatic, very quick access to something. And as you're explaining it to someone, everybody, while you're doing that, everybody's totally blind, whatever it is.
Yeah.
The requirement is usually in a double wrapped up fake envelope with no markings on it. So when you're in the middle of doing that, you have someone who you interact with, they're called a monitor. Mm-hmm. And the monitor can ask you questions based on what you say. They can't suggest anything. But if I said something like, it looks like it's sitting on, I don't know, a table or a platform of some kind, and it's about this size, and it looks like a brown box. He could say, well, can you access that? And I could say, yes. And he could say, okay, describe the person who put that together. And I can give them a full description of the person, even though they may now be dead. Or they can say, did they have any children? If so, what do they do? And I can describe where they are, how they look, what they do for a living. So everything's interconnected in the psychic world. So it's very quick, but it's also down and dirty because you don't get everything perfectly. You only get about 80%, 70% if you're really excellent at it. So there's things that you will include in there, and what you're saying, it won't be true. They'll be inaccurate.
Sure.
But surprisingly, it doesn't take but a very small piece of information to solve a problem. And if the intent is right, the expectation for outcome and the attention to detail is all that way, you get that little piece of information that solves your difficulty. Now, in the out-of-body condition, totally different. You now have to, once you're separated from your body, you have to leave from where you are physically located, where you're laying on a bed or something. And you have to go find the building that's the target building. That takes not one separation of the body. It could take 15, 20, 30. You don't know because you're looking for a building that you know looks a certain way, but you got to find it. So there's some hints sometimes. They'll say like, they'll hang you a picture, about a postcard sized picture of a building. They'll say, this building exists right now somewhere in the world. And you need to find this building. And in that building on the third floor, there is a vault. And it's like a big bank vault door. With a, the big rotating combination order and all that.
With a wheel. Yeah.
Pass through the vault door, go to a table in the southwest corner of the lab that's inside that vault. And there's an object on that table. Push your face into it, study it, and then when you wake up, replicate it draw it to scale, and identify the parts and what they do. Was very close to, I can't, of course, talk about what my first target was, but I can tell you that's very close to it. And that's what I did.
So
So I learned that from Bob Monroe.
okay, so I have a question here, so that because I want to understand a little bit more.
Probably have more than one, I'm sure.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. So we were introduced to out of body experiences through. She's an artist. Her name is Natalie Sudman. She's been on a podcast, and she talked about how she learned how to do it when she was younger, in her 20s. She would just kind of leave her body, and she would see beings, and they would giggle and laugh, and then she'd try to pop back in. And then there was another guy. His name is Werner Barkusian, and he's a psychologist, entrepreneur, and he learned how to do this through Mahatma Gandhi's grandson, to leave his body. So he explained a little bit on the podcast how he has learned to do it and how he's trying to figure out a system to actually replicate it. So he travels to different parts of at the time we were talking last year, of the country, and there are markers, and he has somebody do it with him, and then they record it to make sure that they're doing it without any biases or so on and so forth. But it's occurred to me, as you've described this, maybe to ask you a little bit more that I didn't ask them. When you leave your body, does time exist? Like, how do you exist? How do you feel that you exist when you're outside of your body? Start from there.
You're consciously, you have the conscious feeling like you're completely and totally somewhere else, physically, mentally, in all ways. But as you're leaving, you can see your body laying on a bed. You look down at it. There's there's a lot of hazards with this. They're not bad hazards. They're just things that will detract you from your goal. Like a lot of people, when they separate from their body, they may float up into the room and mingle with the crystal chandelier. Okay.
Yeah.
And they're suddenly overwhelmed with all the different lights and colors and refracted stuff all around them. They're literally swimming in it. And it's like a thing of unbelievable beauty in the out-of-body case. And so they get wrapped up in that and then suddenly realize that, wait a minute, and they slam back in their bodies, and they've been doing this for an hour, and they got nowhere further than the chandelier. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens that you have to be able to separate yourself from, not be distracted to. The other problem is the separation. I mean, the separation is got a lot to do with vibratory senses of vibration running through your body. It's almost like an electrical charge, and it begins somewhere in your body, and it's like a feeling like it's going from maybe your feet to your head, or your head to your feet, or starts in the middle and goes both ways, that kind of thing. And most people, it's an really uncomfortable feeling, so they shut it down. So they never have the experience. People that are in severe accidents, who are, in hospitals, who have been, in some circumstance where they're in a half unconscious state, will sometimes separate from their body. It's a normal occurrence almost in a near-death experience, because the trauma occurring with the body and the mind is so great, you separate. And so you're kind of an observer outside watching what's happening to your body. And that's what happened to me in my near-death experience. So once you realize that that's possible, I think, later in life, you sort of have these things spontaneously anyway. Controlling them is the trick, because there's virtually no control when they're spontaneous. They just occur. You're out of your body. You have experiences that are sometimes bizarre, sometimes not. And it makes you feel like, well, there's something really different here. And maybe I need to see a psychiatrist or,
Well,
checked out.
does it still happen to you spontaneously?
Oh, yeah. I have them all the time, spontaneously.
Where do you go?
But controlling it is hard. It's hard for me anyway. It took 14 months of being in a lab in a shielded room, laying on a bed with sounds being bounced off my body from all different directions to reach a point where I could generate that sort of vibratory sense where I could separate, and then learning to control that. So in fact, I'll tell you a very short thing here. It's when you first begin to develop control,
Mhm.
and you start separating, if you're laying on your back and you're floating up to the ceiling, the first thing you sense is you start having a sense that something's looking over your shoulder, and it's something that's not quite wholesome. It feels like it's kind of ugly, and it makes you really nervous because it's like you're in the room with somebody, and you're afraid to look at it, and because it doesn't feel right. And I reported that to Bob, and he said, "Oh, you'll figure it out." I said, "No, Bob. Does this happen normally?" He said, "Yeah, it happens to pretty much everybody." And I said, "Well, why don't you just tell me what it is?" He said, "No." And I said, "Why not?" He said, "No, it's something you got to figure out for yourself."
It's a sign of a good coach.
And yeah, and finally he said, he said, "What I'm going to suggest to you is going to sound crazy, but you got to deal with it." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Get in its face and deal with it." So the next time I separated, I just kind of really steeled myself and flipped over, and it was my physical body laying in the bed that was giving me all the problems.
Wow.
It's so earthy,
Yeah, it's so dense. It keeps you
Yeah, it's
down.
like in the mud,
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's in your way. It's
Yeah, it's in your
always
way.
hanging there. What a metaphor.
Yeah, you're always connected to it. I mean,
Yeah,
and a lot of people see this silver cord sometimes, and some don't. And
sure.
I don't know if we invent that to make ourselves feel more comfortable. And a lot of people they're terrorized by being separated. I mean,
Do you,
what if I can't get back in?
well, okay. So yeah. Let me ask the question then, because I've listened to a boatload of NDE experiences for the
Yeah.
past maybe 4 or 5 years. They're all fascinating. They're all a little bit different, but they're all very, very similar. And
Yeah.
we've had people on the podcast who've shared theirs as well. There's a sense, what I'm understanding, there's a sense of euphoria that cannot be explained by our senses. And I think what you were saying too, your senses are amplified, but it's what
Yep.
I'm understanding as well is that colors also have a sound and that you
Oh, yeah.
create with your senses at the same time.
Yeah. It's everything. In fact, that's how we were able in the remote viewing arena. We're able to determine that the truly really great remote viewers or the really great psychics are the ones who have a serious case of synesthesia.
Ah,
The mixing of senses,
yep.
where you can see math as a musical pulse, and feel taste pain maybe, or
Yeah. And you
strange
see
bizarre
colors with
mixtures of
music.
senses.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I didn't think of that. So, okay, so when you were out of your body, let's just take it when you were training at the Monroe Institute. But how did you move away from the distraction of the euphoria? Because That must be a great
That's
power,
the
right?
14 months of hammering at it,
Yeah.
doing it over and over and over and over and over till you're sick of it. You reach a point where you sort of habitualize it. You make it a habit. It's an unbreakable habit that you don't even pay attention to anymore. As soon as you're able to develop it into an automatic, like a habitual thing that will happen every time, it becomes boring.
Yeah, sure.
And at that point, you can
Says you.
like go to the next step of control. And
Yeah.
it's just, you got to be immersed in it. It's like learning a language so that you speak it with the right dialect and everything. It's hard to do. And if you're totally immersed in it and you can't rely on your old language, you get the new one pretty quick.
What do you believe would happen if you just decide? So the next time you have a spontaneous OBE, you just decide to hang around there for an indefinite period of time. What would happen?
I don't think you could really. I had an experience once. I've had a lot of surgeries because of my injuries and stuff.
Yeah.
And I had one time, and that means I was under full anesthesia quite a bit. And this one time I came out of anesthesia after a pretty significant surgery on my spine.
Mm-hmm.
And when I woke up, the problem was my digestive system didn't. There's parts of your sort of what we call your automatic systems, your automated systems that get anesthetized too. So when you wake up and your digestive system doesn't wake up the same time you become more conscious and you get your feeling and all that back, your body will automatically keep producing acids. But if the rest of it's not working, it can get really incredibly painful. The only way to get the system to wake up after it's been anesthetized, and it won't wake up on its own, is you have to take away all the drugs, everything that's contributing to the system, to that problem. So you go through an enormous amount of, I got to tell you, agonizing pain trying to wake up that part. And so I asked the doc, I said, how long is this going to take? I'm not sure how long I want to deal with this. And he said, well, it could take an hour, it could take 3 hours, it could take a couple of days, it could take a week. He said, I don't know. Everybody's different. So I looked at my wife and I said, hey, I'm sorry, but I got to leave. I can't be here for this. So I went out of body.
Of course.
I went straight up into the cosmos, right to the star. Just kept moving. Yeah.
Where'd you go?
I went so far. And I was moving so fast that when I finally started looking at things, my eye caught something that I found was unbelievably different. And what it was a series of stars. They were in the exact shape of, like, when they stack the pins in a bowling alley.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 3 stars, 2 stars, and 1 star. Now, if you see that normally, you can say, in all probability, the bottom right star is 100 light years further out, but it's a little brighter. And the second star up to the left is maybe 10 light years closer, so it's a little bit dimmer. And in that way, all the stars look exactly the same brightness, the same everything, but they're not really in a plane. You understand?
Yep.
Okay. Well, in this case, these stars were in a perfect plane. 3, 2, and 1. They were exactly side by side, just like that. And I couldn't believe it. So I stopped and I was looking at this and I started thinking, wow, that's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And then I started thinking, where the hell am I? I couldn't remember even who I was. Like I was that far away, kind of in my head. And suddenly I started drifting backwards, faster, faster and faster, until I was moving so fast I couldn't see anything again. And then suddenly felt this jolt, and I woke up. I was back in my body. And I opened my eyes, and my wife came over and she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No, I'm still in pain." "How long have I been out?" That's what I asked her. And she said, "About 10 hours. So I thought it was out for days. I mean, like a week or something. And it was 10 hours. So I thought about it. I said, I need to talk to the doc. And this is like 5 in the morning or something. And of course, you can't get a doctor to come in at 5 in the morning.
Sure.
But I raised so much hell about it. They had the doctor come in. And when he came in, he said, "What is it? What is it?" I said, I would like a 18-ounce Pepsi on ice. And he said, "No, no, no, no. If I give you that, you think you're in pain now. You can't digest it. It'll just tear you up." I said, "No." We argued for probably 20 minutes, and he finally got angry. He threw his hands up in the air and he said, "Pull all the tubes, give him a Pepsi." And he went out, slammed the door. And I got the Pepsi. I took one sip and my digestive tract came back. So he said, later that day when he came in, he said, "How did you know that was going to happen?" And I said, "I remembered in Southeast Asia, we use Pepsi and Coca-Cola for all kinds of stuff. It's like primitive medicine. When somebody has a really bad stomach wound and there is all kinds of stuff, and what you clean it out just by pouring a bottle of Coke or Pepsi over it, you know." And he's looking at me like I was nuts. And then I saw him later, and he said, "When you have a bad wound and it's infected, you can leave the wound open to flies, and they'll lay their eggs, and there'll be fly larvae growing in your wound. And if you leave them alone, they only eat the bad tissue." And I said, "You took a primitive medicine class, did you?" And he said, "Yeah." So there's a
Or
lot about
Coca-Cola.
primitive medicine. Yeah.
We used to, my
Also,
brothers, go ahead.
you can dissolve nails in it too.
Yeah. I was about to share that a quick example. My brothers and I tested Coca-Cola I remember in a petri dish with copper pennies. So pennies that had
Oh, yeah.
discolored.
Yeah.
And we just polished them. I
Really
remember it took a day and it polished everything off.
Yeah.
Man, that's interesting. That's interesting. Not as almost as interesting as traveling for 10 hours to the outer edges of the cosmos.
I've had other events like I did a remote viewing in the lucid dream state where they monitor you with super gluing wires to your head, and you got this big umbilical, and you plug it into the system, and you lay in this monitored room, and when you go to sleep, they can see the sleep spindles occurring. They can see the REM coming in. So they know you're asleep and in dreams. What most people don't know is when you are in that dream state, having a dream, if you realize it, you can signal somebody just by staying perfectly still and looking over your left and right shoulder very rapidly 4 times. And what happens, it puts tiny little spikes right on top of the REM node, because these 2 muscles out here cause that to happen. When they see that, they know by the REM and everything, you're sound asleep, you're having a dream, and you're awake and aware. And then they can generate a target for you to do.
Wow.
And the way this was supposed to operate, and we did this in Stephen LaBerge's Dr. LaBerge's sleep lab at Stanford. It was a whole experiment we did. So we did a number of these, and the first one I did, I was having a dream that I was in a really pretty area of the some alpine valley with the large Christmas trees, and the wildflowers and the hills and mountains in the background, and a little barn down at the bottom of this hill with a road, a little dirt road leading to it. And parked outside the barn was a Mercedes. And so how I got there was a problem. In the actual dream, when I was having the dream, I was riding a bicycle on a gravel road. And the idea here was, the instructions I had was, if you become lucid in your dream, go to the lab and pass through a wall and look at the target being shown on a screen, a computer screen. And what would happen is, they had this computer inside a closet with a door lock and tape around the outside edges of the door. So nobody could know what was being on the screen at the time. But they had a button outside, and you push the button and it would randomly generate a photograph on the computer screen. So the only way you could see that photograph would be if you actually passed through the door into the closet. The problem I had is, I'm riding a bicycle on a gravel road and I have no idea where I am. But I'm lucid, so I signaled them. Now I got a problem. Where's the lab? So the way I decided to fix that is, I'm lucid in a dream. So I'm thinking, okay, if I'm lucid in a dream, all I got to do is modify the dream. And the way I'll do that is, remember the Wizard of Oz? Where I say, I'll just click my heels together, and when I open my eyes in the dream, I'll be in the lab.
Did you have ruby shoes?
Could have. I'm not going to say.
Yeah.
Anyway, I did that, but I made a mistake. Instead of saying I'll be in the lab, I said I'll be in the target. And I wound up standing on that hill, that alpine valley, looking at the barn with the Mercedes. So I said, well, this is kind of cool. I'll walk down there and see what I see. So I went down there, went in the barn. I started having flashbacks to when I was a kid, because I spent many, many summers on my grandfather's farm in Georgia. So the smell of the barn gave me flashbacks. I'm having all kinds of remembrances of that in the dream of the barn. So I walked around inside. I checked everything out. I even opened the door of the Mercedes, and there were no keys in it, or I would have tried to drive that. But, I interacted with it, what it felt like hours. And then I remembered I was still in the lucid dream. So I had already collected so much information. I didn't know if I could remember all of it. So I better wake myself up. And the way you do that is, you stop. You look over your left and right shoulder 4 times again, and you get those little spikes on the rim, and they wake you up. And then you thought where you were, talk about where you were, that kind of thing. So that's what I did. The time that I was actually dreaming was about somewhere in the neighborhood of about 3 minutes, perhaps. A little less than 3 minutes.
It felt like hours.
That entire hours of dream was 3 minutes. And when I woke up, I drew the place exactly as I saw it when I clicked my heels together. Guess what the target was?
Exactly
it's
that.
A virtual overlay of what I drew.
Wow.
The difference is, the road wasn't on the front of the barn, it was on the back. And the Mercedes was parked in the back and not in the front.
Well, barns have a rear and a front door.
Huh? Yeah. But it was flipped. It was like the image was flipped. So you could say, well, there's some kind of processing going on there because of the callosum, left and right hemisphere. We did that. We did 4 or 5 targets like that, and they were really, really good. The problem comes in when you try to generate too many lucid dreams. What happens is you signal to come out of the lucid dream and they wake you up and you draw the picture, you talk into the mic, and then you have to like use the men's room or something. You unplug the umbilical, you come out of the sleep lab, walk down the hall to the bathroom, you walk in and there's no lights. Must be the breakers off. And I look down at my finger is passing through the light switch. So I'm still in a lucid dream called a false awakening. So false awakenings start occurring, which is fine because you just have to signal again and they'll wake you up. But after 7 of these things, I was getting so many false awakenings, I wasn't sure I could wake up. I was kind of stuck in the lucid dreaming area. And I started thinking about that because I decided I was going to test it. The way I tested it, I said, I'm done for the day. I'm not doing this anymore. I did the report. I talked into the mic, drew the picture, changed clothes, took a shower, changed clothes, walked out, got in my rental car, and went back to the hotel. And I don't think I had anything to eat, but I did do some stuff in the room, and then I turned the TV on and jumped on the bed, and I was watching a Western, and when the color of the walls started changing, and I realized I was still in a lucid dream. And I have to tell you, that's when I started to panic. It was like, holy cow, this must be what it's like when you're crazy. You're in a totally different world.
Well,
and you can't get out of it.
Maybe when you're crazy, it's not crazy. Maybe you're in the world that you're supposed to be in. Yeah.
Yeah. My conclusion was, I'm done. I'm not doing lucid dream studies anymore.
Wow.
And I don't think we should be doing them because there are people that probably don't have the curiosity and the strength of mind that I had in the numbers of experiments I was involved in to get out of something like that. They might have gone crazy. They might have had a psychotic break as a result or something. I became concerned about others.
Wow, that is fascinating. So you said strength of mind. Like I get the curiosity thing because the curiosity would compel somebody to try that out, right? The strength of mind. So what about like, can you, so if you imagine yourself back in those lucid dreaming experiments, you could indefinitely, if you decided, if you had this a steely mind to decide, you know what, I'm going to stay here as long as I want, you could explore anything like you would in your OBEs.
You could.
Right? It would be the same realm.
I mean, that's in the circumstance, possibly. I think there are also automatic safety valves in there, what I would call like an automatic switch that you can't, when you're adjusted to a reality that you believe is true, it would be very, very difficult to short circuit that for a long period of time. Now I'm saying that, and I don't know that to be true. Okay.
Okay. Well,
that's my sense of it.
So here's my question to you. For somebody like yourself who has had all these experiences out of the 3D realm, like I mean, if the listener listens to part 1, they can see you've had experiences in the 3D realm that no one else could possibly have on this planet. And on the opposite end, the same. But so you have a perspective that's very unique, deeply, profoundly on both ends.
Well, and I will tell you, I've discovered something that by having those experiences, that I think true science needs to listen to. There are so many scientists out there who say I'm studying lucid dreaming. Or I'm studying crazy people. No, I'm studying out of bodies. I'm studying this. I'm studying that. How do they know when the person reports they're having a near-death experience, that's not an altered, completely altered state that's different from anybody else's near-death experience? And unless you're talking to somebody who's had a near-death experience, a controlled out-of-body, remote viewing or psychic functioning, lucid dreams, that's the only way you can tell the difference. So when you're doing a study, let's say on lucid dreams, and you bring 35 people into the room and you study each and every one of them, they will give you descriptions of their lucid dreams that may appear to be almost exactly the same. I don't mean the same dream, but the same state as they explain it. But they may be totally different states. So the science is writing things about these states that you're not even sure of the boundaries. How do you establish the boundary if you don't even know where it begins and ends?
Yeah, good point.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's an eternity of 360.
There's a really famous guy who wrote a lot of science fiction. I don't know if he's still alive or not. His name is Dick. I can't remember his first name. Philip Dick. I can't remember his first name. But he wrote a lot of science fiction. And I believe when he's writing a science fiction, he stops taking his meds. When he doesn't want to write, he takes his meds. I think some of his ideas are they're just so complete. They're like a universe unto themselves, almost as though he's living it. And he can turn it on and turn it off. It's hard to explain, but I think it's why he's such a brilliant sci-fi writer.
Well, this is why I think the world really needs to celebrate artistry, not celebrate successful, financially successful artists, but artistry, because artistry starts with, why not? Like, why can't I imagine this? Why can't I do this?
Yeah. And I will tell you, I've met a lot of artistic people in my life because the brilliance of psychic functioning comes through art in many cases. And so many they're actually so creative that they are different from the average. And if you really work at it, you can take someone, I think, who has a complete problem with, let's say, schizophrenia, and get them interested in an artistic format. And I bet they will produce some of the most unique and mind-blowing art that anyone on the planet would produce. You know,
and go ahead.
I was just going to say it. So you build a big hotel and you bring them all in the same hotel and everybody does their own thing and they support themselves because this hotel produces art across the board.
The Medici did this in the 1500s in Florence, right?
Yeah.
They were bankers, but they appreciated the power of artistry, and so they started the mentorship of the art community. Like, I mean, it's a no-brainer for us to do that. Like, you may have met him, Roger Nelson. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yeah, I know him.
Okay, at the Pear Lab in Princeton, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So he was on the podcast about 6-8 months ago, and he described a good friend of his who was an artist. He says, this guy was absolutely brilliant. He said he was one of the best sculptors, one of the best painters. He's a musician. And he said he didn't care about financial success so much that by the time he reached the pinnacle of an artistry, he was right there where he could monetize it. And he didn't care. He just went
Yeah.
on to another
Right.
form of art. He didn't care.
Well, it doesn't matter. You got because the world says this is important doesn't mean it is.
That's
And
that's right, brother.
I am guilty of some of that myself.
We're all
Like
hypocrites.
there are times when in my life when I was going to lose my transportation because I couldn't pay for it anymore, and I'd turn around and spend money to go somewhere and see something. It was like that's crazy when you think about it. That's not logical, but it is logical.
Ah, well,
Yeah.
yeah. The illogic is logical.
Right. But you have to in the real world, and see, I don't think for a second this is the real world that we live in. But in the real world that everybody thinks exists, you have to stay functional and you have to have at least 1 foot in understanding the boundaries that you cannot exceed. But there are areas where it's okay. So you exceed them there. But whatever those boundaries are, the difficulty is we don't get a full appreciation for the magic of being human. That's sort of a significant difference between us as human beings and the dolphins who have a great deal of intelligence. That every once in a while you see a dolphin flip over and start blowing rings, the bubble rings, because they like doing it. It's crazy. What good is a bubble ring going to do for a dolphin? Nothing. They do it for their pleasure. I've interacted with wild dolphins lots of times in the water because I did a lot of diving in my youth. And I can tell you, they'll surprise you with their intelligence, but they're in some ways always connected to their environment. Always, or they die.
Yeah,
They
always have
to
a
be,
foot
or
in.
they die.
Always have a foot in
And
functionality. Yeah, sure.
yeah, for name the
Sure.
functionality, but we don't appreciate the full skill sets of human, what that means. We're magical beings. We can have 1 foot in the total crazy, magical, flipped out universe over here. And then this side over here, we can participate in an invented world, which we all share.
So what do you think reality is then? A few minutes ago, you said people think this is the reality. What is it?
Yeah, the closest I've heard it's come to it is, if you could imagine being in a small room, like 10 by 10 by 10, and it was filled with tiny little bubbles that big. Just filled with them. And each of those bubbles is another existence of a world or a reality. And we are consciously in our decision making, even the decisions we make, which are totally unconscious, jumping from bubble to bubble to bubble to bubble. But it's not in a continuum. They're not interconnected. We may be in this little bubble back in this right-hand corner near the floor. And that one decision puts us up in the upper left corner near the ceiling in another tiny bubble. The mistake we make is it's the exchange of all the information in those bubbles by all the consciousness bouncing around in all those bubbles. It is like this holistic understanding for what reality is. We assume that everything we do that someone else does is exactly the same. That's not. And you see that in every single thing that happens with a human. But one of the most obvious and easiest for me to talk about would be observation. Witness statements are terrible.
Sure.
You can have a 3-second event in a crowded room. If there's 20 people in that room, you get 20 different stories in reporting it. And the reason why is we come from our intellect is born out of different cultures, different training, different customs, different teachers, different beliefs, different, and you can go on with different till the cows come home. But we assume everybody sees, smells, tastes, feels, hears the exact same thing we did. That's a mistake. And until you start understanding that you're kind of victimizing yourself by living in a world where you think everybody thinks like you are. You're missing some stuff. I hate to tell you. And that's provable. There's observational things, tasting things, hearing. Every sense the human has can be fooled. And it can be fooled with two different people in the same room, fooled differently. So you've got to learn to appreciate what other people bring when they come into the room you're in and you're sharing that same bubble in that moment or in that second.
Could you be fooled in the same way in your OBE experience?
Oh, sure.
You can
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just one more bubble set.
Oh. So it's...
See, we assume everything's real. And I don't think anything is. I think it's our own creation. And I think there's a reason for it. The reason is we're all here to have some experience to carry forward so we have a better understanding for who and what we are. But we're not anywhere close to understanding what we as a single human life in a very finite span, what we represent.
So when you leave,
we may be the feeler of some collective.
the feeler
It's trying desperately to know why it is. And the only way to do that is summation of experience.
So when you finally exit your body for the last time, what do you envision? What's that?
You just change clothes.
Ha.
In other words, you're the same entity. It's just that the breadth, width, height, and depth of you as an entity changes.
Are you going to explore the cosmos when you finally leave?
I don't know what I'm going to do. But the cosmos may be too small. I don't know. And the backyard might be too big. I don't know the answer to that. And you can't know the answer to that in this life, place, time, and situation. All you can do is try to make the best of what it is you are living in. And in my experience, whatever you do should produce something positive for you. And only positive action provides a reaction that's positive for you. Nothing else will. So why people insist on being negative about things and then wonder why their life's crap is beyond me. And
those are simply wise words.
Yeah, it's a, if you really think about it, everything you do, if you think about it and you try to do the best possible thing, it's going to feed back to you. It's going to loop back. It's how we think psychic functioning and remote viewing works. The reason I know what's going to happen 110 days out is because at 110 days out, it happens to me how I report it. So that's a full loop. Now, the probabilities are that I can't predict that loop when there's more than me involved in the production of it. So it's a mix of experiences. So the things that truly work are when a single individual has a choice to make over something they don't know about, then nobody else knows it. But once they make that choice, that's the loop feedback they're going to have. So how they think about why they do things is more important than the actual doing of it.
Well,
I
that's
don't know if
a
that makes
great force,
sense
isn't
to
it?
you or not. Huh?
That's a great force, right? Because when you're thinking,
Yeah.
you're also
Creating.
imagining in a way, right?
Yeah.
You're
And
calling
you're
you're
creating
calling
the
upon.
outcome.
Again,
You're creating the outcome. You're
yeah.
you're creating a scenario in which you get to have the feedback and few others will. It's almost like the best way to live a good life is to project a good life.
Hmm.
You
What
know, It-
what artistic endeavors do you take on? Like, what's your thing?
artistic endeavors.
Yeah. Do you
Well, let's
have one?
see. Yeah. I took sculpture from the guy who ran the Cochrane Museum in 6 years, and so I'm a good sculptor. I can paint and watercolor,
Yeah.
oil, uh, finger paints, whatever, doesn't matter.
You're active? You're active with these?
Yeah, I wasn't for a long time because of the pain I was dealing with
Yeah.
because of my injuries, but I'm doing way better now. So I've gotten a lot of my quality back. So yeah, and I'm starting to paint again. I never stopped sketching. Um, it I think it's part of why I was able to produce things in the remote viewing area that were good.
Are are
The way my
you
mind worked.
well, are you out of body when you're painting or sketching? When you're in the zone?
No, when you're in the zone, I think what you are is you're like you're 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 like waiting in the essence of what makes something there. Um, it's one of the reasons why I don't like modern art, and I don't like um, impressionistic art past a certain point because it loses something when it becomes too uh, if too esoteric or too you know
Abstract.
too abstract. Yeah, it loses something. The reason why pristinely good art that's done with an idea behind it is way better. Like I would use the Dutch artists as an example. Their play with light is phenomenal. They really understood how to take just a common everyday picture and hit it with light a certain way that you could almost be in the room.
You reminded me of an artist we're trying to get a hold of, and they had to decline because he doesn't speak English. But his
Uh-huh.
team was very interested in having him talk about his art. And this guy here, he's in his 40s. His art is through making impressions of people and things through
Mhm.
glass slabs. And he would do it by smashing the glass with a hammer. So he would actually while he's breaking the glass, he's actually making the design and the impression.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's wild.
He's breaking and
Because
creating at the same time.
yeah, he's going. Well, he's going like in three different directions. They're all simultaneously.
It's crazy.
I mean, his perceptions are split.
Yeah.
They're shooting
Yeah.
off in all directions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said.
I wonder if
Split.
he's that way all the time.
See, that's such a good question. You know what? You and I, you and I will interview him. Do you know German? Do you speak German?
Ein bisschen, but it's guttural German. It's Bavarian German. There's three different kinds of Germany. There's the Kingdom of Bavaria,
Yeah.
That's very guttural German. Then there's High Deutsch,
High German.
High German, which is Frankfurt, Stuttgart, places like that in the middle of the country. And then there's the Plattdeutsch, the flatland German up north, which is the hardest one to learn because it involves English, French, Danish, German, Austrian, and then you got to throw in whatever village the dialect. And so when you listen to it, you hear words in almost 7 languages come out in a typical paragraph. So,
Yeah.
and the reason for that is the North German border would move way up here and then move back down here and then move way up here. There's a huge statue of Bismarck in North Germany, and he's standing there with his hands up like this, like my country. There's bullet holes from both sides.
Yeah, sure. People don't move as quickly as wars. Yeah.
And yeah, I saw something one New Year's morning. I drove up to the North Sea. I was on New Year's. No, it wasn't New Year's. It was the summer solstice.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be there for the sunrise. So the sun rose. You can imagine the North Sea and just flat ground with nothing but grass and hundreds of sheep. And when the sun came up, in the next 20 minutes, I watched 35 or 40 lambs being born.
Wow.
All at the same time.
Wow.
It's an amazing thing. I was the only one there, me and the sheep. They were all being born at the same time. It's incredible.
I mean, I hate to use the word coincidence, but is this a common occurrence at that time of year?
I don't think it is. I just happened to be there when it happened. It was,
That's pretty magical.
I still remember that. That was 50 years ago almost. I mean, it was like, wow.
Is there anything that you haven't done? That's a legitimate question.
Well, there's a lot of stuff I haven't done.
Sure.
I always wanted to fly a plane, and I just never got around to it. Now they wouldn't let me near a plane, as old as I am. You've seen that movie, Secondhand Lions, haven't you?
No.
No, Secondhand
Lions.
And the 2 old guys, their brothers, live together, and one is kind of down to earth, and the other was, chasing a princess in the Far East or in the Middle East and fighting pirates and making tens of millions of dollars, stealing gold from other people and all that kind of stuff. But at the very end of the show, they're always doing something insane.
Mm-hmm.
It begins in the beginning of the show with a highway patrolman sitting, eating his lunch on the side of the road underneath an overpass. And this biplane comes screaming under the overpass. I mean, literally 2 feet off the road, flies under the underpass by him. And it's the 2 brothers in an old biplane. And at the end of the movie, they call up the nephew and they said, "We're sorry to tell you that you lost both your uncles this morning." So he drives out to the farm, and the barn is sitting there, and there's an impression of a biplane with both wings where it went through the 2 doors. Yeah. They tried to fly it through this way, but anyway, killed them both. Trying to fly the plane through the barn with the door shaft closed. It's a great movie.
Right to the very end, exploring to see what was possible.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to see that movie now.
Flying in it, that's why.
So this movie I'm going to watch, and then a movie that I think it was Rudy Shield who told me to watch, A Tear in the Sky.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting movie.
So
there are a lot of good ones out there.
Have you ever remote viewed in the spirit of exploration, just for the sake of exploring what you don't know?
I can't do it. And the reason why is to call it remote viewing, I'd have to be completely blind. So while I might have a lot of interest in stuff, I can't pick my own target. It has to be given to me by my wife, who is my targeteer, if you want to call her something. She always prepares my targets for me. So I don't know who's asking for it. I don't know where it's coming from.